For the next 2 weeks, Railway will be traveling through the north of Russia with the White Knights Steam Express. We'll be making a 5,500-kilometer tour with St. Petersburg as both point of departure and arrival. During the course of the trip, our train will be pulled by different steam locomotives. There have been negotiations for some months over which routes to ride, since other train traffic will probably be disrupted by the unpredictable speed of the steam locomotives. While the first locomotive is being prepared, we'll make a trip through St. Petersburg. The city of St. Petersburg is not yet 300 years old, but except for Moscow, it's the biggest city in the Russian Confederation. Because of the enormous number of canals, 65 in all, St. Petersburg is also called the Venice of the North. So there's no better way to explore the city than by boat. The view from the boat is not the only thing worthwhile. There's a lot to experience on the boat as well. St. Petersburg is located on a delta of the Neva River at the Gulf of Finland and is divided by over 42 delta islands interconnected by bridges. Because the city is located so far in the north, the sun doesn't set in the month of June. These nights are called white nights. One of the most spectacular buildings in St. Petersburg is located at the Gulf of Finland, far outside the city center. It's the palace of St. Petersburg's founder, Tsar Peter the Great. Peterhof is the Tsar's interpretation of the architecture he came across during his many travels through Europe. One of the most spectacular parts of the palace is the Grand Cascade and Water Avenue, designed by Peter himself. The central piece is called Samson Rending the Lion's Jaws. It symbolizes Peter's victory over the Swedes. Peter the Great was very fond of water and fountains. All over the enormous complex, one comes across them. The chess fountain is very special, a fountain in the form of a large chessboard. However, traditional fountains in neatly designed little parks are also part of the collection. The Tsar also had a sense of humor. This little arbor is not what it seems to be. Unexpectedly, water can come out from everywhere. Children especially love these tricky fountains. It's a beautiful walk through the park. The enormous number of fountains seems almost endless. Despite all the pomp and circumstance, largely designed by the Tsar, Peter preferred to stay in Montplaisir, a relatively small building on the water. The Tsars also loved trains. In 1837, the first Russian railway was opened in the 200-year-old town of Pushkin. In this special room, the Tsar and his retinue waited for the train that would bring them to one of the palaces. The railway company was of vital importance in the planned economy of the former Soviet Union. Trains were used primarily for industry and military transport. Information about the Russian railway company was for so long a top secret that only in recent years has some information come to the surface. When the steam engines were brought out of circulation, a large number of locomotives of various classes were stored as a strategic reserve. The locomotives had to be kept and maintained in case Russia needed them in time of war or during an oil crisis or power failure. Until 1990, there were almost 9,000 locomotives in operational condition. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, a large part of them deteriorated in such a bad condition that there was no strategic reserve over. A number of locomotives remain in protected locations. They're maintained by enthusiastic volunteers who enjoy the honor of riding in them once in a while. A journey like this one with the White Knight Steam Express is for many a real treat. During this journey, we'll be pulled by several different steam locomotives. Despite the fact that the sun is still in the sky, it's late in the evening before we finally take off with the White Knight Steam Express. Because of the White Knight, it won't get dark during the first part of this journey. This way, it's possible also to enjoy the view in the evening. Fortunately for those who can't sleep right away, there is the possibility of ordering a nightcap. The first destination on our journey is Petrozavodsk, a journey of about 450 kilometers. The area we'll cross in the days to come is called Karelia. It's a wilderness situated between St. Petersburg and the Arctic Circle. The area consists of vast forests and over 60,000 lakes, including Lake Ladoga and Lake Onega, the largest lakes in Europe. Now we're approaching the platform of Petrozavodsk, our first stop during this long train journey. At this station, they'll switch locomotives for the first time. We prepare for a trip to the city. Petrozavodsk is a medium-sized Russian city with 280,000 inhabitants. It's the capital of the Republic of Karelia, built on the shore of Lake Onega. The city was founded in 1703 as an iron foundry and munitions factory for Peter the Great. The translation of the city's name is in fact Peter's Factory. The beautifully decorated Kirov Music Theater is one of the city's sights. In the park next to it stands a war memorial to those who fell during the October Revolution of 1917. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, many statues of Lenin were destroyed, but not in Petrozavodsk. In the middle of the square, Lenin still stands proudly. There's a festive atmosphere in Petrozavodsk during the few weeks of the year in which the temperature allows it. There's a small amusement park for children, and during the holiday period and during the weekends, the streets are used for typical Russian shashlik picnics. But there's another reason why both Russian and Western tourists come here. With a regular boat connection, Petrozavodsk is the point of departure for a trip to Kizy Island, 55 kilometers northeast of the city, straight across the water. It's a 2-hour boat trip, so we have ample opportunity to look at Lake Onega. Lake Onega is one of the 2 largest lakes in Europe, almost completely enclosed by dense forests. For that reason, hunting and fishing are popular activities here during the summer. During the long winter, the lake is completely frozen over. After an almost 2-hour boat trip, we approach Kizy Island. On Kizy Island, there's a collection of old wooden buildings which offer a good overview of the development of Russian wooden architecture. The 18th century Church of the Intercession is a beautiful example. A little further south, we find the Church of the Resurrection of Lazarus, the oldest wooden church in Russia. The Church of the Glorification of Christ, however, is Kizy Island's showpiece. With its 22 little spires, this is a masterful example of architecture. The church was built in 1714 from pine wood logs and covered with beautiful wooden decorations. The roofs and the little spires are decorated with little pieces of wood that slope downwards, a technique used so that rain would run down from the roofs more easily. Like many historical buildings in Russia, this 40-meter-high church is also on the UNESCO list of buildings to be restored. We return to Petersburg station to continue our journey. In the meantime, our previous steam locomotive has been replaced by another specimen. This impressive locomotive is one of the few remaining locomotives of Project 36. These are steam locomotives which were specially built in the Soviet Union to pull passenger trains. Our next destination is Kem, more than 400 kilometers away. Since we're not riding that fast, we've got plenty of time to enjoy the landscape. We arrive at the station of Kem, an obscure place which forms the point of departure to one of the black pages in the history of the Soviet Union, the Solovetsky Islands. Nobel laureate Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote about it in his masterpiece, The Gulag Archipelago. The Solovetsky Archipelago was one of Stalin's prison camps from 1923 to 1939. There's little left of the original camp. Stalin's prison camps were spread all over the country, but this camp on the Solovetsky Islands was built especially for political prisoners and clergymen. Only a few prisoners survived the camp, and only the citadel, or Kremlin, and some auxiliary buildings remind one of the atrocities that took place here. Solzhenitsyn collected the stories of survivors in his books, which were published only after his banishment from Russia. Our train stands ready for departure when we return to Kem station. In 1994, Solzhenitsyn traveled with the same train, When he returned to his native country after 20 years in exile, he traveled for 2 months through Russia with it. The Arctic Circle is our next destination, a distance of 200 kilometers. While the sun is almost at the lowest point it will reach during the white nights, the cook is busy preparing a Russian specialty, crepes with red salmon. Of course, this feast would not be complete without Russian champagne. On the longest day of the year, we stop at the Arctic Circle. Because of the orbit around the sun, we're now situated in the area where the day is truly at its longest. For a few days a year, it's light here almost 24 hours a day. The place has been marked by a little monument. A last look at the monument and off we go again. The first 1,000 kilometers of our journey is behind us. Our next destination, Murmansk. Climbing over the rails and on the monument wasn't successful for everybody. Fortunately, there's a doctor permanently on board the train. After a difficult night without darkness, everyone is ready for a strong cup of Russian coffee in the morning. Shortly afterwards, we arrive in Murmansk. Due to the frozen climate and the heavy military security, this region isn't very popular with visitors. A train filled with Western tourists, pulled moreover by a steam locomotive, attracts therefore a great deal of attention. Murmansk, despite its chilly climate, is an important port located on an ice-free bay. That's why this place is an ideal location for the northern Russian naval base. Also with 2 nuclear-powered icebreakers. The city has a population of almost 500,000. A large part of the population consists of transitory inhabitants who work in the harbor under annual contracts. The city has a small center. Most of the inhabitants live in concrete blocks of flats all over the city and the surrounding hills. Murmansk is also a heroic city, a leftover title from the Soviet age. On top of the harbor stands an enormous statue of a soldier from World War II. We're back at Murmansk station. Even though it's light, it's really late in the evening when our train departs. We're headed for our next destination, northwest to Nickel Murmansk. The next morning, we quickly discover that we've ended up in a totally different sort of area. The ecological destruction immediately strikes the eye. The ground is literally blackened. Hardly anything grows here. The nickel and copper mines in Nickel Murmansk are the cause of this environmental pollution. We are the first foreigners who are granted permission to travel through this area and to even step out here, although we're not allowed to leave the platform. From 1980 to 1993, these factories emitted 700,000 tons of toxic substances over the area, and they're still functioning. Ironically, it is the Japanese and American car manufacturers who are the most important clients since the end of the Soviet Union. They use the raw material for the manufacture of catalysts. It's not an area one likes to stay in for too long. That's why we leave again and set off for a new adventure. We're headed for Pechenga, the most northerly situated train station in the world. The mines are not the only ones responsible for the dead vegetation. In this area, the last Russian atomic test above ground was carried out in 1984. The local authorities then decided to set fire to the ground. Blackened ground seemed more attractive to them than a dying vegetation. Pechenga is located in the middle of a military training ground, and normally passenger trains don't stop there. The most northerly situated train station in the world, however, is something train lovers do not want to miss. 10 kilometers away from Pechenga, we're suddenly stopped by soldiers who aren't very impressed by the written promises we carry with us. For almost a year, the travel company has negotiated with the authorities about this visit to Pechenga. However, our obtained permission turns out to be insufficient. Several attempts to solve the problem over the telephone seem to end in failure.
The military have refused to let us go because they're having military maneuvers now there. And they were not told before that. They said, if you come in a week, it is fine. Now we're having military maneuvers here. And we don't let you pass through.
The Army threatens that further down the rails they've positioned a tank, and they won't hesitate to shoot in case we continue our ride. So we have no choice but to go back. Reluctantly, they uncouple and turn the locomotive. For the Russian train employees, it's a big disappointment also. They too have never seen Pechenga for themselves. With nothing to show for our trouble, and rather disappointed, we set out on the return trip. After 5 long days and more than 1,500 kilometers of continuous traveling, the disappointment is great for most of the passengers. For the continuation of our journey through Russia, it's necessary to follow a part of the route we've already covered. We have to go all the way back to Kim, where we'll follow another direction. Again, we pass by Murmansk, and again we're headed for the Arctic Circle. There, the first part of our journey through Russia comes to an end. Next week, we'll continue our trip through a completely different area.